Good afternoon. It is July 7th, 2021, 5 p.m. Welcome to the San Marino Unified School District Board of Education special meeting. Here is your Board of Education's President, Shelley Ryan.
Thank you, Dr. Choi. It is my pleasure to welcome everyone here this evening in person in San Marino Unified School District. We're at 1665 West Drive in San Marino in the boardroom. In-person attendees must pre-register at our bit.ly Board of Education in-person website. You may also join virtually via Zoom at www.smusd.us/media. All meetings of the Board of Education are open to members of the public unless publicly noticed as a confidential closed session as allowed by the Law Education Code Section 35-147. Members of the public may address the board as outlined in the public comment section of the agenda. The audio of all meetings is recorded, and a member of the public may be held liable for any slanderous or otherwise defamatory statements. In consideration of the board and members of the audience, please turn off or silence your cell phones while in the boardroom. The San Marino Unified School District encourages those with disabilities to participate fully in the public meeting process. If you need a disability-related modification or accommodation, including auxiliary aids or services to participate in the public meeting, contact the assistant to the superintendent at jdelatory@smusd.us or at 626-299-7000 extension 1310 at least 48 hours before the scheduled board meeting so that we may make every reasonable effort to accommodate you under Government Code Section 54953.2, Americans with Disability Act of 1990, 20242, USC Sections 121, 132. Documents provided to a majority of the Board of Education regarding an open session item on this agenda will be made available for the public inspection in the district office located at 1665 West Drive, San Marino during normal business hours. In addition, such writings and documents may be viewed on the district's website at www.smusd.us. I'd like to open the session now. Call to order, and then please join me as we rise and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Dr. Choi.
Place your hand over your heart. Let's begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Dr. Choi. May I have approval of the agenda? This is an action item.
I move to approve the agenda for this evening.
May I have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mr. Kalaki. Thank you, Mrs. Chong. I would like to do roll call. Mr. Chang,
Aye.
Mr. Kalaki,
Aye.
Mrs. Chong,
Aye.
Mrs. Jack,
Aye.
Mrs. Ryan, aye, and our student board member is not here this evening. The motion passes with the approval of the agenda. Public comment. This is an information item. The Board of Education has adopted Board Policy 9323B to ensure the public's right to be heard in any matters pertaining to the San Marino Unified School District. Persons who wish to provide public comment will have three options to submit public comments. First, you may submit through an online form. Second, you may request to speak during the meeting through question and answer and phone dial-in. Third, you may request to speak during the meeting in person via the public comment card. Submit it through an online form. The public may submit public comments for the open session on July 7th from 11 through 3:30 p.m. Comments received during this time will not be read during the meeting, but will be provided to the Board of Education. Anyone wishing to do so may do so at SBOE 7721 at bit.ly. Request to speak during the meeting via question and answer and phone dial-in. During public comment, the meeting will pause for 1 minute to take requests to speak. Raise your hand function is used to take requests during the public comment period. For online attendees, press the raise hand icon to add yourself to the queue. And for phone attendees, dial *9. The speaking order will be determined based on the order of requests received. Individual speakers will be unmuted and called to speak. At this time, request to speak during the meeting in person through the public comment card. You will please complete any public comment card and submit the completed card to the designated drop box with the assistant to the superintendent no later than when the agenda section or information is called by the board president. There will be opportunities for public comment. They're offered at the start of the regular open session for matters that are on the agenda. The Board of Education reserves the right to add a public comment period prior to any individual item on the agenda. 5 minutes may be allotted to each speaker, maximum of 20 minutes to each subject matter. However, in the event there are more than 4 speakers on the same subject matter, the board president retains the discretion to adjust and limit the time allocated to each speaker to ensure that all wishing to speak will be heard within the 20-minute allotment. 5A, communication from the audience regarding matters that are on the agenda are to be made at this time.
Thank you, President Ryan. We'll pause for 1 minute to take requests to speak on matters on the agenda. If you would like to make a request, please press the raise hand icon, dial *9, or submit a public comment card. We have 30 seconds remaining. If you would like to make a request to speak, please press the raise hand icon, dial *9, or submit a public comment card. President Ryan, we have actually one just came in. We have one request to speak from Mr. Eric Lee. Eric, your line is now open.
Thank you, Mr. Choi. Hi, Ms. Ryan. Pleasure to see everybody again. First off, I want to thank everyone in the community, parents, students, community members at large that came out to help pass Measure E. We as a community must remember that these measures and future measures don't just pass themselves. They pass because we as a community come together for a common goal. Thank you especially to Mrs. Jack for your leadership. Our next task as a community is to select the best superintendent for our unique school district. To the board members, now more than ever, we need your leadership and engagement with the community. I echo the sentiments of many San Marino families that it is imperative that the hiring of our next superintendent be competitive. The use of an independent third party to conduct a nationwide search using input from the community of the characteristics that San Marino stakeholders value for our next superintendent protects all the stakeholders, including the board. At the end of the day, when Dr. Wilson tendered his resignation, no one faulted the board because the board used an independent third party that led to the decision to hire Dr. Wilson. Instead of pointing fingers at the board, we're all wondering if there's a warranty with the search firm if the superintendent decides to leave before his 3 years is up. I also want to suggest that perhaps the board can set up a Google form or other means to solicit opinions from the public on the characteristics and values that they have for our next superintendent. Finally, one of the main concerns of an impartial nationwide search is cost. Conducting a quick comparison, the cost appears affordable considering we are searching for our district's educational visionary. The consultant used to search for Dr. Wilson charged roughly $13,000. Compared to the costs associated with the Measure E campaign, more than $40,000 in consulting and committee fees, which did not include the LA County Register fee, which was multiples higher, it would seem prudent to hire an independent executive search firm and ensure that we find and screen the best candidates for the superintendent position. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Next, 6, board discussion regarding superintendency vacancy. This is an informational item. We have with us an expert who will help us and facilitate a process of assessing our district needs, evaluating the data that we have, and the expenses related to the process of recruiting a new superintendent. And again, this is an information item. Do you want to?
Certainly. President Ryan, members of the Board of Education, this afternoon we have Dr. Joel Shawn, who is an educational consultant, a very highly regarded former superintendent of a high-performing school district in the neighboring area, Arcadia Unified School District, and someone that is very well respected and trusted in the educational community. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Dr. Shawn.
Thank you, Linda, very much. And thank you, board, for giving me the opportunity to come and spend some time for you. I have to tell you, I shared with Shelley and Linda that I haven't had this suit on. And since my daughter got married, so it's been 2 years. And when I put it on, I almost couldn't get the pants buttoned. So that tells you a lot of things about me, which is that I'm a little rusty. So you got to bear with me and, give me a little slack, I guess. But I really do appreciate the opportunity to come and help you. And that's where I wanted to start, that my role here, I don't have any skin in this game, so to speak. I'm a friend of the district, if you will. I have some idea of what you're going through. And I really appreciate the public comment. And I think it was really well said. And so from my perspective, I'm here to serve you. My role tonight is I put together an agenda and, through some materials and put them together, and with the help of Linda, hopefully they make sense. The idea is to help you figure out precisely how you're going to select your next superintendent. And I think that's real important that we agree that that's the goal. The goal is you've got to figure out how to do that. And unlike what some people might think, there's no handbook for that. There's no guidelines. There's no one way to do it. It really lands in your lap, so to speak, to figure out how you want to do it. So again, I think the public comment's important. By the way, I also want to congratulate you on passing the measure. That's no small thing at all. And I was thinking about that last week when I was planning. If it didn't pass, thank goodness we don't have to do that, I think I would have been planning a completely different discussion with you. So we don't have to go down that road, but it's a big deal because the finances of the district and to maintain who you are as a district is having the resources to do that, and then the leadership to make that happen, which is why we're here tonight. So I think I have control of this thing, which is probably dangerous. So I put together an agenda. It's meant to be nothing more than a guide, and I think you have copies of this in front of you. Let me go through it real briefly, and it is meant to be departed from. We don't have to be a slave to it. We're here tonight to have a conversation so that you can continue the process of thinking about how you want to do this. And just to keep in mind that as a board, you will make a decision how you want to do this. No one else will make that decision. You will take that up as a formal item at some point, not tonight, to be clear about it. We're not taking any action tonight. This is simply information. You will agendize it. You'll have a public meeting. You'll take comments about it, and you will vote on the process by which you're going to go about hiring a superintendent, be it Well, we'll go through that in a minute. So we've talked about the goal. Introductions we're kind of doing now. I have a brief warm-up activity that I would like you to do, which I'll come back to. Then I'll kind of yak at you for a few minutes and talk about some of the challenges that I think are facing you as you go about selecting a new superintendent. And then probably the heart of tonight is to delineate the options that are available to you in selecting a superintendent. So we'll do that. And then I've prepared two articles. One, what does a superintendent do? And the other, how do you typically go about, how is a superintendent typically found, recruited, and signed up? And I'll ask you to skim those, and then we'll have a conversation about it. Lastly, I had planned for you to do what's called a forced choice. Probably using the term forced isn't a great idea. Maybe it should have been just your preferences. Probably won't do that tonight, but I'll tell you that at some point in the future, or when you think it makes sense to do that, the idea that you rank what the options are and see how as a group your preferences play out, I think is a good process to do, and I would recommend you do that. So what I will do is walk you through how that process works, but we won't do it. And then we'll have a discussion about your next steps. And then I always like to end my work with any group with a very brief evaluation to get some feedback about how I did with you. So introductions, just a little bit, I should have sent my resume earlier so you had a chance to pick it apart. Ms. Chan and I already discovered that her son is a freshman at RIT, which is where I went to school. So it just shows you what a small universe it is. Just a little bit more about me. So I was a deputy superintendent and superintendent in Arcadia for a total of 10 years. Excuse me. Yes, find me some water, please. Thank you. He's good. You tell him you want something and it just magically appears. I think that's germane because while clearly Arcadia is Arcadia and San Marino is San Marino, I do have some sense of what it means to be working in, living in, working with a board of a high performing school district. And I think it is unique. It is different. It's not the same as working in LA Unified or Monrovia or Walnut, which is where I live. They're all different. And San Marino is different than Arcadia, but I do have some appreciation of what the dynamics are and the pressures are that you're under. I think that's really all I need to say, unless you have any questions for me about my bona fides, if you will. Is there anything you want to know about me that wasn't revealed through the paperwork? Doesn't sound like it. See, I practice wait time. Okay, so brief warm up. I'd like you to take a minute and just, you can do it in this book. You can just write down some notes. And what I'd like you to do is for no more than 5 minutes, just jot down, what do you hope for in a new superintendent? What is it that you hope your dreams are, if you will? I mean, it could be that they stay for the next 30 years. It could be that they increase enrollment. It could be that they ensure stability to the financials. It could be that they're a good person. It could be that they're a dynamic leader. It could be that they're cute. It doesn't make any difference. So go ahead and I'll time it and take 5 minutes and just jot your notes down. And then I'm going to ask you to pair up, and I will pair up with Shelley. Is that okay? Mm-hmm. And I'll pair up with Shelley and we'll share what we wrote down. We'll take one more minute, so start wrapping up your thinking. And if you would finish up whatever final thoughts you have. Okay, so if you can just pair up with the person sitting next to you, and I'll come and let's share what we wrote.
I prepared it today.
Oh, okay. So he or she is a leader with integrity. And then he or she is a high caliber, understand the management. And then can help San Bernardino Unified School District to build a solid curriculum and instruction service.
Yeah, that's good. I think the key is to try to find somebody who is not looking for a stepping stone.
Yeah.
Somebody that knows our community or is capable of understanding the community, because that's going to be a factor that they're going to have to work with in trying to achieve anything. And strong academics,
Yeah.
but also programs and trying to focus on philosophy of letting our kids feel comfortable with who they are.
Or maybe the one more work with all the kids.
Our kids. Yep. So I think that's the key.
Misalignment.
Oh, number 6 was communication. It's anticipated. But you have to have to understand.
Because you want to be able to not only get equity and engagement and opportunity for every student.
Yeah.
Yeah. And recognize that there's, we got limitations. So we have limitations in funding. So how do we creatively make it work?
So the first and second reading.
So that's a month right there.
Yeah, like this, you know, the he or she can help to manage, but nobody can
Well, there's only
come
so
on
much you
the
can do.
result.
There's only so much you can do.
Yeah.
So you've got to try to creatively work within those
Yes.
those constraints, those limitations.
So then catering that means addressing and managing those expectations.
This one is a very difficult for the 15-year-old. Yeah.
perceived as being on top.
The fear
So
is
you
pull it.
feel like you've succeeded in getting this position. And then you define your next step of success as succeeding.
Hearing now, you have 2 questions, state, but
Stephen, can you turn off this mic? Are these on?
they are currently on, but because it's a public meeting, vaccination rates.
Not only in.
So far, it's really good. Our vaccination rates really high.
Yeah, I thought it would be.
Yeah, yeah, we had over 100 respondents very quickly. Yeah. So the parent was really great. Talking about, thank goodness. No, but this one parent called me asking about our vaccination.
To address. Oh, yeah.
Makes sense.
Relevance.
Successful organization.
Yeah. Oh, they do.
Okay, I hope you had, did you have enough time to share what you? So let's just do this by way of debriefing. Were there any ahas that happened as a result of writing that down? Anything that just came out of doing that you think is important to share with each other and with our public?
I felt, Jane was my partner, but I felt pretty much, right? I mean, we use different words, but I think the qualities that we were looking for, we had a similar viewpoint.
Good.
Would you agree with that?
Definitely.
Yeah, that's great. Any of those qualities you want to share? I mean, as an example, what might be 1 or 2 that you want to share?
Well, one of the things, I think it was funny because as we spoke, one of us would check things off the list, like, oh, she mentioned that, so I can take that one off. I think we both talked about communication skills being one, being able to communicate clearly and communicate well with the community.
Let's just throw some more out. Tell me what else you wrote down. What are some of the things you said were important to you?
To me, the first important, he or she will be a leader with integrity. Yeah, that's very important. Yeah.
Great.
Then with that, then we go to
Yeah.
the
Excellent.
order. Yeah.
I mean, it seems like such a simple thing to say, but there's been plenty of districts that have ended up with a superintendent that have lacked integrity. And those districts have gotten themselves in some real bad trouble. So that's really a really important point, I think. And there's no blood test or litmus test for that.
Yeah.
That really becomes one of the things that your process that you go through has to really check for that. So thank you.
I think it's, we were also talking about how it's important that you have a superintendent that anytime they're talking about planning or strategy or long-term goals, to always bring it back to the question of, are we working to benefit every student in the district and working to find the student where they are at this time and move them to the maximum potential that they can reach.
Yeah, that's
by the
great.
time they leave us.
And kind of like what Ma'am and Jane said, Shelley made that point too. And that's a real challenge because there's a pendulum, in our work. Now we're going to work on the lowest performing kids. Now we're going to work on the gifted kids. Sometimes the kids in the middle get forgotten. And the way you framed it was, I think, really precise, that every kid, in a sense, we're going to make sure is making progress. Everybody's growing. And if the superintendent doesn't have that vision, then there's no unifying force around it. The board and the superintendent have to have that vision. So I think that's a really great.
And that's both academically and in their development of their identity as an individual.
Yeah, that's a really great point. There's actually some interesting research about what they call soft skills. And we tend to be so focused on academics in our work. And the research says that organizations that focus on the affective domain with kids, the kids do better academically. And yet we rarely spend the time to actually create curricula for those soft skills. So I think, again, making sure that you and the superintendent have this picture of a child who is growing into an adult that is more than what they did on the SAT or getting into, whatever. So I think that's a great point. Jane, did you have another one that you wanted to share?
Sure. We talked about being an instructional leader.
I teach a class. One thing I did do where I sort of still failed retirement is I teach a leadership class. And this whole thing about being an instructional leader is so important, but sometimes we use it as a label. All the principal has to be as an instructional leader. All he's got to do is focus on teaching and learning. Doesn't mean anything, right? So clearly underneath that is a whole set of skills that this individual needs to have that's going to enable them to inspire. I love the way someone I work with, our job is to create the conditions where ordinary people can do extraordinary things. The superintendent's job is to create an instructional vision where ordinary teachers, not super people, can do extraordinary things. And that to me is what I take from saying instructional leadership is important. Thank you. Nam, did you have one that you wanted to share?
I did, and again, it's a little more specific, right? But it has to do with kind of part and parcel, but financial acumen, right? Especially in light of what's going on with public education and specifically in our school district with declining enrollment.
Yep.
And whether or not they have potential solutions. Now, I don't know whether there will be, right? Declining enrollment may just be declining enrollment, but at least someone who has a plan and a strategy. Again, it may not work, but I think we have to have someone with that kind of, and it's not even overall a vision, but really just a plan.
No, actually, what I hear you saying is it is a nuts and bolts thing. Once upon a time, superintendents could trust their CBOs. Now, I'm not picking on you, Linda, because I know you're in that role, but they could. I mean, they basically could say, not my job. I've got this person. And in fact, it was kind of intentful. It provided you some protection if things went south on the financial side. It goes back to the integrity question. I felt when I became superintendent, was that old line, follow the money. And I really think that's true. I think what Nam is saying is really true. You may have, because of the local control funding formula and what's happening with the LCAP and all those things, the CBO is playing a different role. There's a fusion between the instructional piece that we just talked about and the financial piece, but that's really hard. It's another one of those things we give a lot of lip service to, but really shifting those financial priorities when 85 to 90% of your budget goes to salary and benefits and you have declining enrollment, hard to do, but it has to be done. So finding someone who has, if they have the value, let's put it that way. They come into the job with the value that the money and planning for the use of the money and how you track it and meeting all the requirements of it is a priority. And that can be done in concert with the instructional and the ethical things. So that's a new thing. It really is. It wasn't something that was expected of superintendents 10, 15, 20 years ago, at least in my experience. Shelley, did you want to share one?
Yeah, for me, it's the accountability piece. I'm seeking a superintendent that's dedicated not only to continuous growth academically for students, but those soft skills, the social, emotional, and this superintendent needs to look, it has to be a 5-tool player when we're looking at not only instruction, but finance. And then you've got facility needs because you've got a changing curriculum now that requires technology and the foresight to look at how classrooms are changing and how we deliver instruction, but also not only facilities, but it's the management of all of the moving pieces and parts, whether it's grants, whether it is the money for extended learning, or we're looking at needs of all students like special education, English language learners, as well as your top and medium performing students. How do we get them, as Mr. Kalaki said? Dr. Troy's over here, Mr. Kalaki's over here. How do we get and address the kids where they are at and where we need to go? Because that accountability piece is huge. It's huge because we're all accountable here, and as well, the superintendent needs to be accountable for all the delivery of the alignment of the curriculum, the standards, and the finance behind it. So it has to be pretty intentional.
So not to put too fine a point on it, just to pick up on what Shelley's saying, the superintendent's the only person you guys hire. It's the only person in the district you hire. I mean, it's a weird thing if you think about it, to have such a focus. And yet it is ultimately this individual that's going to be accountable to making sure what you want happens. And you're not always going to want the same things. You know, you're going to work towards that consensus, but it's okay. You're 5 individuals. You're going to have different opinions about things. They're going to have to bring the complexity of what's being asked for is immense. So again, there's no a blood test that tells you that this individual has all those characteristics. You need a process, you need a way to feel confident that when you hire this individual and you vote for them in a board meeting and you write a contract with them, that they have these characteristics. And at the end of the day, that's your responsibility. And it's really, again, when it comes to the personnel side, that's the only time you have a responsibility for a hiring. So it's a big deal. And that accountability piece, I think, is really kind of a summation of really what you're asking. You're asking, you've got brilliant people in this school district and in this community. You need someone who ultimately, it's the conductor. They're keeping the music going and they're keeping everything going in a direction. And if it's not, they're a person that you can then go to and they're going to be accountable ultimately for writing the direction if the direction is not going where it needs to go. So we could go, I mean, these are, you get a strong sense of, you agree about what you're looking for as we start this. I added one more thing. I shared it with Shelley. You want someone that's smart, you know, and that may sound really, I don't know, superfluous and whatever that means, but this is not for the weak-hearted. I mean, it really does require, I mean, when I did this, it requires, it's the best job I ever had in my life because it was the most challenging thing, but it does require skill sets and cognitive abilities and emotional abilities. And, you know, if I look at myself, maybe sometimes I wasn't the best husband I could be because I'd go home and there were things that I could not do at work that maybe I did it at home. And I'm only saying that because it really is hard. What you're looking for in an individual is hard. One of the things I teach my students that I'll share with you, and it goes to this, is when you're a leader, you're not allowed to get angry. You're not allowed to get angry, ever. And that's, no one teaches anybody that. And I share that with you because the person who can do that, the person who can take all this in and manage all these things and lead and work with all of the diversity that is present in any school district is not allowed to get angry and lash out. They're going to work with people that get angry and lash out. You know the line about, you know why your mother can push all your buttons? Because she put them there. So, you know, this individual has to be able to not allow those buttons to be pressed. Okay, hopefully that it's a good little taste of what a process might look like or what part of a process would look like. And again, you heard that in the public comment, that the community wants to have some sense of being able to participate in the shaping of the characteristics of who this person is we might want to hire. And it's important because we need ownership. If we're going to support this individual, we need to have ownership in who they are. So let me go on and just yak at you for a minute or two about, and this is Joel's 2 cents about challenges, and they can be dead wrong. So I'm presenting them because I think in the world of solving problems, first you have to clearly identify the challenge and understand what you're working on, and then you need to look at what might get in the way of accomplishing it. So that's what I want to try to do with you. So time. You got to open school in what's already now 6 weeks, maybe? How long, Linda? When do you open school?
August 11th.
August 11th. So you've got 6 weeks. You got 6 weeks. And it'll open. If you don't have a superintendent, school will open. There's no question about it. But think about the things you talked about. So time is a challenge. You know, how quickly you could appoint someone. And these are my opinions. And anybody is free to disagree with them. They're wrong, but anybody, you know, can disagree with my opinion. That's a joke, folks. So what I've seen in the districts that I've worked with, the districts I've been in, when I've worked with boards on selecting someone, recruiting and appointing, 3 to 6 months is a typical time frame. 3 months is really challenging. And we'll come back to this, but the summer's a little challenging. Right now, to try to actually begin the process, whether it's working with the community or actually getting people to pay attention to national advertisements about for superintendents, it's not the best time. So practically speaking, you're probably not going to be able to begin until August. And so if you kind of go out to your 3 to 6 months, you're looking at some period of time when you don't have a superintendent. And we can talk more about that momentarily as I break your equipment.
Can I ask you a question?
Absolutely, absolutely. I'm sorry, anybody that's got any question about anything, just.
So which month you think is the best time to recruit the superintendent and more attract to the existing or the candidate they want to be?
So Shelley asked me that question, and here's what my experience is. There's no good time and there's no bad time. It's amazing. It used to be you would think you want to target so that as the end of the school year is coming up and people's contracts might be over, that would be a good time to get people. But truthfully, anytime as we go through the options, boards or search firms or consultants go out, there's candidates. There's good candidates out there that you can recruit, except right now. If you were already ready and you had ads out there today, July and August probably are not the best time. But the rest of the year, in my experience, doesn't really matter. It really doesn't. Yeah.
Can I ask, do you have any sense of how the pandemic and all of the movement among administrators is affecting that market right now?
Yeah, I do have a sense of it. Number one, and this will sound like it's a little bit off target, but it's not. There's a shortage of teachers, a big shortage of teachers, and it's going to get worse and worse and worse. And I frame that because districts' attentions are on that. And as administration is leaving, and that's really to your point, Jane, it's more challenging because there are going to be more openings. But I think it actually creates an opportunity for you because it's a little bit like selling houses in this market right now. I really think it's a fair metaphor where it's a seller's market. And as you present yourself for who you are and the characteristics you're looking for and what this community is, you're a district that a person's going to want to come to. And so if there's a lot of openings, yes, you're competing, but you have the opportunity to separate yourself from everybody else and then to get somebody here. But it's going to be hard. I think it is going to be more challenging because of the pandemic. I think there's going to be more openings. And I think it may very well affect, let me say it differently. As you get to the place where you make a decision about how to select a superintendent, you're going to want to factor that in. You're going to want to factor in that the pandemic has created a whole new playing field, some of which we don't have a clue. We don't know what the effects are. I do think you're going to have to be carefuler. Is that a word? More careful.
More careful.
More careful. You're going to have to be more careful because there will be more candidates. And there's always this dynamic, and I'm sure you all have talked about this. Do you hire someone who's never been a superintendent or do you want to hire a seated superintendent? I don't know the answer to that question. I offer it here because you are going to want to think about that. If you just hired Jeff. Jeff was a person who hadn't been a superintendent. So, you have to factor that in. The field's much bigger if you're looking at that, and particularly with the pandemic. Seated superintendents have experience. No matter what you do, you don't always know why they're leaving. So again, it's this yin and yang of having to try to figure that out. Money. Now, this is just my experience. When I go out and work for people, I charge $1,000 a day, and I'm cheap. I mean, I am. Because I don't want to rip anybody off. But $1,000 is a lot of money. When I worked as an interim superintendent, you all probably know that the state teachers retirement system, which I'm part of, has a limit on how much money you can make. And once you make over it, they start penalizing you for it. So it's about, I think it's $52,000, $48,000. So $1,000 a day is 48 days. So when I was an interim superintendent, I could only work 48 days. I'm only framing that because there's you have history. You went out, you hired consultants, you've used search firms, and you paid what you paid. And that is what it is. In my experience, what I've seen for the last few recruitments that have occurred is somewhere between $50,000 and $100,000 is what it's going to cost you. That's my opinion. It's not based on real deep research. It's based on what happened in Glendale. It's based on what happened in La Habra. It's based on in Arcadia, they appointed from within, but we did look at search firms. And that's not to say that there isn't, you can go out and probably find a way to do it for $15,000, or as the person said, the last process you used, I don't remember what the number was, but it is what it is. There's always a dynamic around it. I'm going to give you a little bit more information in a minute about the 4 options, and we can talk about the costs and just, my biases. And that's what you're getting. You're getting my biases. So, you either agree with them or you don't, and you're free to do that. But money's an issue. And it should be. People just voted for, they voted to increase their taxes. That's a big deal. So when they see the district, they see you making a decision about going out and spending $30,000, $50,000, bringing Joel in for, whatever, they are going to scrutinize that. So that's a challenge, right? The money part of this is a challenge that has to be taken into consideration.
I'm sorry, Dr. Sean.
Yeah.
I apologize, but I just want to make sure that our voters understand that our taxes were renewed, not increased.
Thank you.
I just wanted to clarify
Right.
that.
Thank you,
Fair
Mrs.
enough.
Chen.
Very good. So actually, I knew that, but I set you up for that, Nam, so you could use that. Yeah. No, it really is. But they're paying taxes. They're choosing to tax themselves in order to support the school district, and that's a big deal. So they have a right to scrutinize what you do when you decide to write a contract with somebody to come in and do a recruitment or whatever. So it's just something you're going to have to consider. And then there's the politics of it. And, maybe it's always a little dicey to talk about politics, but here's one of the things that when I got together with Lauren, and we have a little group of retired superintendents, and we'd come together and have lunch. And what was clear about the pandemic is any decision you made was going to be hated by somebody. Somebody was going to be really mad. You could not make a decision that approached consensus. Keep kids home, send them back to school, your staff, all of these things. I think in a way, you have to recognize that hiring a superintendent has a similar dynamic to it. However, the processes that you choose to use will either approach getting as much consensus, or it will actually create more dissension among the people in the community. But there is a political side to it. What is a person's ethnicity? Just to put it out there. What's their gender? Where did they come from? Are they a person who knows the community or can know the community? Those are all realities that have to be brought into consideration as you think about this. And then just some practicalities that I want to Did you have something?
Yeah, Joel, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
I wanted to follow up with two questions. First, Ms. Chong mentioned about, the pandemic and what it might do in terms of the playing field of who's applying. I'd like you to speak a little bit about whether you had a sense not only of who's available, but what the neighboring community sees as some of the challenges in coming into our school district. Yes, high performing, high expectations. What is the perception out there? Not that delineates or dictates what we're saying here and what we're looking for, but I just want to hear what's out there in terms of what the community is saying.
To be completely fair, I haven't done any kind of study of,
Okay.
but we talk to each other. So you just had someone who was here for a short period of time and left. People know that. People, why? They may not know the answer, and clearly going to Claremont is a positive thing. It actually, maybe not for you, obviously, but in terms of that perception, it wasn't that something bad happened and he had to leave. And I'm saying it that way because that could be the perception, and somebody might think or say that. So you're viewed as a challenging district to come to. That's what I can tell you. Your view, go ahead.
Okay, so to echo Sherry Ryan and also your comment. So as a 20-year school board member in the San Marino Unified School District, personally, I come out of two factors right now. I think that these two factors probably is probably some of the candidates probably will hesitate to participate for selection. Then before the first one, as you already mentioned, the last one they already working for short term, but this is a short term they attribute to the we are not a unique school board, so they have something cannot make a quick decision, and then so kind of like a torture the superintendent, and then he decided to leave. And secondly, because we are a smaller school district, so we don't have extra additional funding.
Right.
So parcel tax every several years, maybe couple years, need to renew. So then this probably were a big factor. Plus, you also need depends on the bond. But right now, for climate in the San Marino Unified School District, look like it's very difficult to pass the bond. So with these two, this is my personal comment.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that, let's call it what it is that there's a lot of scrutiny around the fact that you've raised money, you've done what you did, and that creates a challenge. Jumping a little bit ahead, but what's the superintendent going to cost you? It's going to cost you $250,000 to $260,000 a year. That's the going price of a superintendent. If you are unable, I'm not saying you don't want to, but if you're unable to pay that amount, and that doesn't include the benefits, you're talking about, what do you got to add? At least 20% to that, right? So you're talking about $350,000 when all is said and done, STRS and the payroll taxes, the benefits, everything. So that's a big, big number. And for a long time, superintendent salaries kind of stagnated. And after the recession, they started to go up. And I think they've been, and it goes back to your point about the pandemic. I think, frankly, if you go to your characteristics, how do I want to say this? You're going to get what you pay for. You are. I mean, it really comes down to that. So then you have to factor that against what can the community support? I'm not going to say accept, they have to support it. That subtle difference is really what it is. In some places, they just have to accept it. Whether they support it or not doesn't make any difference. In San Marino, they have to support it, or you have a whole other set of challenges. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? So this is really important and good. It's exactly what I wanted us to do, because your decision about how you're going to do this has to take into consideration those two factors. It has to take into consideration the pandemic. It has to take into consideration what just happened. It has to take into consideration what I just said, which was you're viewed as challenging. Now, what does that mean? Because let me tell you, as a superintendent, ex-superintendent, I don't see it as challenging. You're people that want to do this. You're people that want to be here. You're a community that the kid comes to school ready. Do you know what that means? School ready means you're not fighting poverty and hunger and they haven't read, and you have all the assets in place, and the challenges are good challenges, but that doesn't mean they aren't real in everything that you have to face. Go ahead, Jill.
So the second part of my question relating to that had to do with when you mentioned ethnicity and gender. How does that play a role if we're perceived as a challenging community with assets? Are we going to be receiving candidates, for lack of a better word, I just want to put it out there. Some superintendents come as a way of using San Marino to step into where they want to be. This is not perhaps their destination school district. I think our board is looking for someone who's not doing that, but is wanting to be committed, is, I don't know how you can describe it, but it's that loyalty and integrity issue, that you're here for the long haul. You're here to see this continuous growth. You're not here just to put something in place and then leave. And I'm not speaking about everybody's different situations. I'm just saying, can we still attract that person that meets all of these requirements and can address the needs of our school district?
Well, I think,
And how do we do it?
Yeah, I
How
think
do
you-
we get that candidate?
I think you can, but I
How?
think you're going to have to pay for it. So the challenge is, you will not, in my opinion, if you're going to put a salary out of, let's just say $180,000.
Mhm.
I'm not saying you would do that. You won't get that quality of candidate. If you put $200,000 out, you're not going to get that quality. It's funny. I wrote down on my thing, the person will stay 20 years. I actually think what Shelley just said is a real critical point for you right now. You can't afford, as a district, in my opinion, someone who's going to come for a short period of time. You may have to have a transitional period. I mean, you may decide there's a transitional period with the goal of, because again, with the research I've done, you've got a board election in November of 2022, right? So that's a year and a half for all intents and purposes. And so that's gonna put a marker. There's a marker there. So as an analytical person, to me, your goal is stabilize the district, make sure that you pass the parcel tax, thank goodness. You're financially okay for the next couple years. You have to go out and do your fundraising every year. You have this wonderful foundation that does this for you. So if the goal is someone's going to stay 20 years, you could go out and try to find that person now, and you could find them, but you're going to have to pay for them. You will have to pay for them. And to go to your point, if you're not able to pay for them, or the community won't support you paying for them, then you very well may end up finding somebody, and I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent, who was using San Marino as a stepping stone. And the little bit of, you're getting to know me, right? I love to interview. I used to, I could get any job I interviewed for. Didn't mean I was qualified for it. So the challenge again is, how are you going to cut through what the community, what the persona is, what the perception is of the person who's going to come to you. How are you going to cut through all that and find the person who is in fact committed to all of these things that you said? That's where you are. Yeah, go ahead.
You mentioned something earlier about superintendents and us, that as a role, there's being more asked of them. And then you also talked later about the salary hire. Is there a correlation you're seeing in what the
Absolutely.
expectations are? Okay.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to the pandemic. I mean, I think the truth is, well, look, there's a couple of dynamics at play. Right now, at this moment in time, school districts have more money than they've had in forever. I mean, I saw the numbers for LA Unified. It was staggering.
Some school districts.
That's right. Well, no, to be fair, you do too. It's short-lived and you've got declining enrollment, so there's a cliff out there.
Mhm.
But the truth is, for the next couple of years, you have more money than you've had in a long time. Federal money, state money, you know, the continuation of the parcel tax, et cetera. But that idea that, this cliff is out there is really a scary thing. So districts, though, that need superintendents are going to be able, it might be bad finance, but they may be able to push more money out into the salary and benefit package to recruit more people than you might be comfortable with. So again, I mean, there's no game being played here. This is just the reality. You've got this, you could go out, and try to find someone. And I really believe if you advertise for less than 200, I mean, sometimes these ads are funny, they go competitive salary and benefits. Quite frankly, I don't think that's a good strategy. You go out and you say negotiable, but some number, $250,000, something that is going to attract people, because that you know how that works. The number gets people's attention. Negotiable doesn't get people's attention. Okay. Let me run through these other practicalities. I'm going the wrong way. Turned it around. We already said the summer may not be the best time to recruit, and I really don't think it is. I had the experience where people were in Europe. I mean, the person you want is out of touch. They're not. You just can't get to them. And you need somebody to run the district. Right now your district's being run, and it will be run. You've got wonderful people. They'll do it. But school opening in it again, not to beat a dead horse. I think coming back from the pandemic is an opportunity that you don't want to lose. So come the opening of school, you've got people coming back. I mean, it's a funny kind of thing, right? People really value school right now. They really value schools. What do they value? Babysitting. They value the babysitting function, right? Let's be honest about it. Now, you hear all this stuff about kids lost all this academic growth and blah, 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 and they value that. But the truth is they want to go to work. They want to be home without the kids underfoot, et cetera. How do you use that moment at this moment in time when, and I think you did, part of your parcel tax passed, the percentage was really stunning. It was really important. And that doesn't always happen. So how do you grab the public perception right at this moment and use that to consolidate changes in teaching and learning that do what you all talked about, which is make sure that all kids, every kid, each kid is making progress. A superintendent's someone's got to lead that effort. If someone doesn't lead that effort, what will happen? Things always migrate back to the way they were before. That's just human nature. So I think there's a window. That you've got to try to capture. And we already talked about this. You want someone that's going to be permanent, stable. You want to get through this. Alex was here how many years? 3. I mean, that's a pretty short 3.5. That's a pretty short. I mean, that's actually the tenure, which is not a good thing. And so I think you want your next leader. At some point, you want that leader to be a person that is people will look at, they'll go, that's Mr. or Mrs. San Marino. You know, they'll think when that person finally retires, they'll go, Mr. or Mrs. San Marino, I'm retired. You know, so that again, just the practical, that you're highly dependent on the community. So you have to take that into consideration.
You know, the last two superintendent, even they stay very short period, 3 years. But personally, I don't think they want to leave, but just the environment, they feel uncomfortable. So I think this time we really need to, I don't think the public community, they understand this, you know, they keep talking about we want to have a best one, but how we can create a very, you know, very positive environment for the superintendent to manage the school district.
Well, I think you're right, but I'm going to pick on your words, Joseph. You can't create a positive environment.
Right.
You can't create it. The environment is what the environment is. So being superintendent here is going to be challenging. You know, and I think you raise a really good point. People, whether it's Alex or Jeff or Joel or whoever, the grass is greener someplace else and an opportunity presents itself. Do you go or do you stay? What is that characteristic that causes, you know, take someone like Lauren, you know, his blood ran San Marino red, right? But I mean, it's a good example because he probably never would have, it wouldn't have made any difference to Lauren if somebody offered him $500,000 to go, you know, be superintendent. Okay, maybe a half. How about? But, well, and you know why? Because Lauren never thought about being a superintendent. That was, you know, it's a good example. So, yeah, I think you're right. I think that the environment it is challenging, and I think you just have to be honest about that, and that you are hyper focused on selecting someone who's got all these characteristics, but has. Okay, I'll be personal about it. So I became superintendent at 56. That was a really good move because they knew, my board knew I was going to retire from the district. They got 5-6 years out of me. You know, for what I'm just saying that there are ways to think about this. You hire a young dude or dudette, you're right. I think it's going to be very challenging with the competition and the money that's going to be out there. So it's just a way to think about it. So, and I think the other point you raise about the supportive environment, you can raise the likelihood that people will support, but there's going to be controversy. There's going to be challenges. You're a small town. You've got very active people. That's what that point is. You've got people that have assets. They're smart. This is their children. This is their school district. They're going to fight. You know, if they feel something's wrong, they're going to fight for it, and it's going to be difficult. So you go into it with your eyes open, right? You go into it with knowing what the challenges are. And ambition's a funny thing. So when the people out there want to be a superintendent, oh, I can handle anything. You know, oh, sure. You know, I can take it all. I've got thick skin. I know. Well, when you live at 24/7 for 3 or 4 years, it's a different thing. So, you know, if it was me, I guess, and I was looking to hire someone, I would be very honest with that individual about the kinds of challenges, what be they lawsuits or complaints or federal complaint. I mean, I would really lay out the kinds of things that might occur and find out. We're going to talk about this a little bit later, exactly how when you're interviewing someone, what do you want to know from this individual? And I think rather than gloss over, if it was me, I'd be really open about what the challenges are and then what the opportunities are. And I think you will find people that want that. I mean, that was my nature. I didn't want it to be easy. But I'll go back to something Shelley said. I also wanted to be accountable. Tell you a real brief story. You may remember this. I fired a really popular coach. I did that. I didn't have the high school principal do that. I went in front of the community. I never put, it was all, the board and me. And this person had won national champion and they were loved. And we took a load. I spent a year with the board preparing for that. Now I share that because that's real. That's what the job of a superintendent is. And you want a person that can do that. Now, you may never have to do something like that. And people may disagree that what we did was right or wrong. That's not my point. My point is that the types of human challenges that you have to interact with, when you do something and there's 50 people here, or there's 500 people on Zoom and everybody's mad, how do you behave? How do you manage that? How do you challenge that? So that's what the superintendent does. Is this helpful? Is this helping you? Okay. So where are we? Whoops, what did I do? Oh, okay. So let's just talk briefly about what the options are. Maybe there's another option. Maybe I've missed something. There probably are, but these four options are generally how school districts recruit and appoint a new superintendent. So you can appoint from within. You can look at your existing staff and you can say, we really think this individual meets all these characteristics. And I'm not an attorney. And so what I'm going to say right now has a 50% chance of being wrong. You do this in a public meeting. You take, it's an action item. It's done as you would take action on anything else. But it's absolutely legal. It's doable. There's a right way to do that in legal counsel. If you choose to go that route, legal counsel will tell you how to do that. Now, second one, I'm going to be a little mean right now, but you do have an option of recruiting and appointing yourselves. You know that old thing about a doctor treating themselves? It's a really bad idea. Boards do it. I've seen it done and they're never successful. It's amazing. They'll appoint someone. Man, I think you kind of led the parcel tax, right? And I mean, I think that makes sense. But when it comes like you might appoint someone, we're going to do the search. We're going to do all the stuff. And it's just a nightmare. You want someone to guide you through these processes so that you too have some distance from it. But I would be remiss if I did not say that an option for you is appoint somebody to lead the effort, do all the things that we'll talk about in a minute. Third one is, and you've done this, you hire someone like me who does this, and they run a recruitment and appointment process. And then last, you hire a search firm. Now, what's the difference? We won't talk money because, I could be dead wrong, but an individual is going to be less expensive than a search firm. They're going to have less infrastructure to support what they're doing. And one of the reasons that school districts hire a consultant or a search firm is that consultants and search firms develop a stable of potential candidates. This is a big deal, right? So people who are, they feel are going to be good superintendents, and they can have, they have a relationship with these people. They don't pay, you don't, as an individual, you don't pay a search firm to do that for you. They find people that a lot of times, because like I'm an SC, guys. Sorry if there's any UCLA people in the room, but you see Mike Escalante and all that, the way it works. It's a network. It's a network. And it's an important thing. So search firms typically hire retired superintendents to do searches, and those retired superintendents tend to work for universities too, and meet people in doctoral programs and have big pools of people. individual consultants may have a pretty good pool, but generally it'll be a smaller pool of people. Now I'm going to give you a bias. In both cases, it's a good and a bad thing. Search firms tend to push the people that they have in their pools. So you have to really, and you will, I'm confident, fight against that a little bit. It's a good thing, because you're going to get a lot of candidates that you might not get access to, but you really want to watch the chemistry and dynamic between the search firm and the individuals, because they want to place their people, because that way they get more people and they get more jobs. But again, the difference between those two are that, in my opinion, the individual consultants will have smaller cadres of people, and they won't have a lot of support, and they'll be less expensive to hire. And search firms have leadership associates, which I know you've used as a good example. They have a really big pool of candidates, and they have a pretty good infrastructure and a success rate in doing things, and failure rate too. So it cuts, all this stuff cuts both ways. There's no magic in this. It's always going to be somewhat of a crapshoot. So questions about those 4 options? That makes sense? Can anybody think of another option? Maybe there is another option. Person magically appears with all the characteristics out of a vortex, and I'm here to lead San Marino. That would be, wouldn't that be wonderful? Okay, so what I was going to have you do, I don't know if you need to take a break, or what would you like to do? If we need a break, this would be, are you okay? We need to power through? Okay, so I put together, what I'd like you to do is, in your materials, there's 2 articles. I was going to say short, but they're not short. Just scan through them. Take 5, let's take 10 minutes. And that way you can, if you need to stand up and breathe, just kind of read through, what does the superintendent do, and the recruitment and selection process. And after you've done that, we'll talk about it, and I'll make a few points about the recruitment process, and then we can kind of figure out where we are. Does that make sense? Okay, so 10 minutes to read through that. It's 6:20. I'll give you to 6:30.
Joel?
Yeah.
I just had a question.
Yeah.
The second one, the superintendent recruitment and selection processes, is this something you came up with, or was there something?
I went through and looked at search firms and consultant companies and collated their processes and put it together into kind of a generalized.
Thanks.
getting.
No. I texted her.
Okay. Maybe tomorrow.
Thank you.
Is that enough time to scan through those? So my intention in having you do that, and I apologize if in any way that seems condescending, is to just get us on a level playing field about who the heck is a superintendent? What do they do? That I found that article. So I don't think it's bad. I think it kind of summarizes, you could write a lot about it. I'm always, we were talking before about this moment that the pandemic creates for us, and that people really value us, but if we're honest, they value us for the babysitting function. When I was a superintendent, my parents said, but you could have been a college professor. There's still, I heard this great lecture guy that does this work about, we need to elevate the image of what teaching is in our society. And I think that's true all the way up. I think people think anybody can be a teacher. What do you got to do? You got 30 kids in the room. All you got to do is just, keep them in control. Try it for a day or two, right? And I don't know, being a board member, same thing. You folks must deal with this. Oh, what's the big deal? You're on the board. What do you do? This stuff is so much more complicated than what most people attribute to it. And the superintendency in particular, I think, as we talked about, and as it's changed in part because of the need to take on the financial side, is particularly different and unique now at this moment. Because if you think about leadership, there's symbolic leadership and there's tactical leadership, if you will, right? So we want the superintendent to represent the district. We want them to be out in the community. We want them to be the face of the district. But unlike a lot of leadership positions, they also have to be a tactical leader. They have to know how to pull the levers of the budget. They have to play some role in negotiations. That talk about something that the public just completely doesn't understand, right? That you can't just fire a teacher if they're bad. I mean, let's just take that one thing. Well, what's the superintendent's role in that one thing? They play a role in that one thing. You have an HR department that has to lead that. And again, and there's an irony in this, if you're doing your job, some component of the community is going to be really mad at you. They're going to be just ticked off because you did what you were legally required to do. And if you didn't, then it's your job to hold that person responsible because they didn't do it right, or it's the superintendent's job if it's someone underneath them. So hopefully, and I think the conversation today has been really good, that you have a very clear emerging picture of what a superintendent does. So let's move and just talk a little bit about what's typically in a recruitment and an appointment process. And then we can talk about this and take, I can take some questions from you about this. So, and it really doesn't matter if you think about the four options. Well, three of the four options will include some of these things. Obviously, if you appoint from within, you're bypassing a whole lot of the processes. So I cherry picked from the article, just so it wasn't that I made up another list. And to some degree, these seem to have been kind of the biggest ones to think about. So why did I start with the first one? Well, somebody's got to draft a brochure. Someone's got to write this thing. Someone's got to figure out exactly what it says, including if it's going to include salary. Somebody's got to format it. Somebody's got to put it on, in a way that going to the second one, that it can be done on EdJoin, because everybody uses, that's the electronic forum now that people apply in California. Maybe it's nationally, I don't know. But also, just putting it in, who's going to put the ad in the paper? Who's going to do it? Who's going to pay for it? How's all that going to happen? Who's going to make those decisions? How are you going to make sure that it's done in a way that's legal and that's done appropriately? Then that third one, we talked about this a little bit, but actively recruiting candidates. An ad by itself isn't going to do it. So again, the search firm and the consultant have a pool of people. They've got a stable of people that they can call on. But they also, this group that Lauren, my retired superintendent buddies, the other Joel Shapiro, funny story. I can't help but tell you a funny story. So I'm at this conference and a guy comes up to me and says, "You're Joel Shapiro, right?" I said, "No, I'm the other Joel. I'm Joel Shawn." He goes, "No, you're not. You're Joel Shapiro." Happens all the time. People confuse us. Anyway, Joel works for a search firm. I don't know, know which one. But in addition, he's always, every single time he does a search firm, he calls me up and says, "Do you know anybody?" So that recruitment process, that using of the network, making sure that we're gathering up, casting the widest net we possibly can is, I think, really, really important. And how one goes about doing that, particularly in the era of social media, how one uses the current technologies to make sure that you're recruiting in a way that raises the likelihood that there's going to be a match between the person and the district. There's an art to that. I don't do that. I don't know how to do it. It's not my skill set. You don't either. That's sort of my point about, who you are as a board. And you might be, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't presume that one of you don't have that expertise. If you do, more power to you, you're lucky. The next one, this is a big, big, big deal. I'm going to say a few words about it. Create a process to screen application and identify the most qualified applicants. Let's unpack that. What's in an application? Who creates the application process? Who collects it? What's it look like? Is it legal? Have you asked any questions that you weren't supposed to ask? You can get yourself in a lot of trouble over this. Is there bias implicit in it? Are you opening yourself up to some kind of stupid lawsuit because you inadvertently wrote something down that somehow limited a class of, just think about our world today, gender bias kinds of things. It'd be really easy to inadvertently do something like that. And then the word screen, what does that mean? Typically, the search firm or the consultant or you get a pile of applicants. You could get 60. You could get 100. Somebody somehow has to read through them and decide first who doesn't meet basic qualifications. So maybe that cuts it in half. Then you got to decide in some order, which of these might you be interested in interviewing? Now, this goes back to the search firm. So they are going to make sure that their candidates are in there, right? They are. So, you have to trust that process, but there has to be some process. And that process can be fairly intensive to actually make sure that you're doing it in a way that holds to your standards. You then typically are presented with, say, 6, 10 candidates in these paper packets, and you're going to decide, okay, this is a rich enough pool, 6, 8, 10, 12, whatever you feel you can do of candidates based on paper, say more about that in a minute, that you feel you want to interview. What does paper tell you? I'm sorry, nothing. We make such a big deal about resumes and applications and cover letters and references and all these things, and they're important, but they just don't tell you the story. And yet you're dependent on these papers and the folks that are bringing them to you to say, this represents the best and an appropriate pool of people for you to interview. Then let's say you come up with 8. That's typically, what have I seen? 6 to 8 candidates get interviewed by the board. So someone's got to contact and set up all those interviews. And there's an appropriate and a legal way for the board to do that. What questions are you going to ask them? How are you going to decide on those questions? How long is each interview? How are you going to decide who goes first and who goes last? That makes a difference. It actually does. Are you going to do them all in one day? And as a parenthetic, you're going to probably interview let's just say 6, and then you're going to call back 3 and you're going to re-interview. And then you may actually bring back 1 or 2 and re-interview them again. So somebody's got to decide on all that. That's my point. It can't just be serendipitous. It has to be established and set up and created and run. Someone has to run that process. I mean, this sounds really silly, but you got candidates waiting out in the lobby there, right? Who brings them in? Who gives them a cup of coffee? How do you make sure that, or do you put 2 candidates in there at the same time? I mean, it's silly stuff that Jennifer probably takes care of, but it has to be decided. It has to be done in a way that is appropriate. We talked about this, but really determining the questions that you're going to ask them is really, that's going to be your vehicle for seeing if in fact this person meets those characteristics that you came up with. One of the things that I didn't put up there, because you really don't have to do it, but I think you do here, is the whole community engagement. You know, it's not on that list, but it's kind of the pre-thing before you even draft the brochure. Typically, you would hold focus groups and meetings with members of the community and solicit their input. That's really tricky because some people think they're deciding who the superintendent is, right? And yet what you're doing is soliciting characteristics in him, but kind of like what I did with you to help you devise a brochure, to help them be involved. There are districts that have candidates interact with the community. It's a real dicey thing. How do you deal with the candidate who wants their application to be confidential because they currently have a job? You know, that's just a nuance in this. How do you keep things out of the newspaper that shouldn't be in the newspaper? So those are just some of the underlying problems. Once you've gone through all that and you've selected someone, you will probably want to arrange a site visit of the candidate. I don't know if you did that in the past. There's a Brown Act issue with that. There's a way for all 5 of you to go, but typically you don't do that. Typically only 2 people go to avoid it being a board meeting. But regardless, it's a step that I think is really important. It's always kind of a funny thing when you go and you talk to 10 people and they all tell you exactly the same thing. It's almost like it's scripted versus you get the truth about people. Another side is a story. As superintendent, because I really am skeptical about most of our personnel practices. Sorry, Linda. I think that people scam us all the time and that the paperwork and the letters. So I created this process and all my people told me, Joel, you can't do that. It's too mean. But here's what the process was. For every administrative position above assistant principal, the top 3 candidates were invited to a reception, and they were all at that reception. And the board was invited, and the public was invited, and teachers were invited, and all they did was talk to each other. And I just stood in the corner and watched. And I'm telling you that because the truth is how that individual interacted in a very high pressure social situation told me more about their capabilities than the interviews and the papers and anything else. Plus, if it was a principal, it was stated, you know, I'm curious, you know, you can tell me what you think about any of these people, but you know, you're not making a decision about them. But think about it. The teachers all got to meet. One of these 3 people was going to be their next principal. So they got a leg up on meeting and interacting with people. And I'll just say it worked really well. Now, I don't think you can do that with a superintendent. I don't, but I'm sharing that because I think there are processes you can use. I mean, maybe you'll have the person do a song and dance, you know, do anything other than just answer questions. Typically you'll have practicums, you'll have them write something. You may have them do a presentation. I think that's all good. But I'm advocating for you to think about doing something beyond what is traditional because you want to make sure this person is the absolute right match for the district. And I think there are like that that process I use. There are things you can do that are outside the norm, shake people up a little bit. I mean, I'm sorry. I wanted to pressure people. I wanted to see how they would act because the job is filled with pressure. And then the last thing I put up there was you will negotiate an employment contract with the individual, term, salary, all the things that are involved in that. Plenty of templates, but at the end of the day, the attorneys may be involved in it. It's become much more common for the candidate to have an attorney represent them. I don't like it, but there's so many nuances in the superintendent's contract, and there's so much law that governs what it is, and if you have to release somebody, and what the buyout clauses are. There's all these technical things that have to be absolutely done correct, and you want to protect the individual as well as protect yourself. But that has to happen. Somebody's got to negotiate that contract, and it has to be signed, and then it has to be approved by the board, et cetera. And then there's all the things after. So you selected the person, you got to introduce them to the community. You have to do all of those things. So I did this because I just wanted to make sure we had a common basis, that there's a lot there. There's a lot to do to make this happen. Let me stop and see, what questions or comments that you have. Go ahead, Jane.
You mentioned, like, in your practical scenario, and I'm not suggesting we do it, but you talked about meeting the teachers or whatnot
Yep.
in your principal's case. So can you speak a little bit about the role of the district staff and the site staff and how they would play or not play in this process?
Yeah, I mean, that exactly, it was the challenge that I had. So, if I was king and I could do anything I wanted, and I was hiring a superintendent, I would do that. I would have a reception with a few of the candidates and let the community talk to them and interact with them. You'd have to talk to a lawyer and see if you're even allowed to do that. But I just have to tell you that, I mean, there's other roles the community and the staff can play. Again, I mean, I think you can have focus groups with them to solicit possible questions. You can do what we did tonight. You can ask them for characteristics. That crossing over that border, the reason why the superintendent is different is because that's the only candidate the board hires. So unlike all the other people, probably you can't do that because you're opening yourself up to looking like you're actually taking input about the specific candidate. But I mean, if it was me, I'd have focus groups. If I was running a process for your district, I'd bring district office staff together. I'd bring the school administrative staff. I'd meet with the teachers. I'd meet with the classified. I would have a bunch of meetings. I probably would do some Google Docs or online surveys. I would collect a lot of data. And this is where the search firms that I know of and the consultants are different. If it was me, I'd be sharing all of that data with you. I'd collate it, I'd summarize it, and I would share it with you so that you could get a taste and a flavor of where the commonalities were among all these groups and where the differences were. But that's the typical engagement is that. And it's kind of unsatisfactory because it feels pro forma. I mean, it does. And at the end of the day, are people going to believe you actually took their input? And remember what this is, you got a group of 50 parents sitting in a room, right? I raise my hand and I make this really brilliant point. Well, I'm going to expect that you use it. And if it's an outlier and no one else agrees with it, I don't care. I gave you my input and you didn't use it. So again, you're fraught with this conflict between input and people feeling like they've actually been engaged. And I struggle with that because I think if it is pro forma, don't do it. If you're doing it because you're simply going through the steps, because someone said you're supposed to have a survey or supposed to have a focus group, but you're not really going to use the feedback, don't do it. And even though if you use the feedback, people aren't necessarily going to believe you or feel like you used it. To me, the break point is if you're not, then you're wasting people's time and they'll resent that. They'll resent that even more. But that's the best there is. I realize it's interesting. I like to think of myself as an artist, so I would be creative and maybe try to come up with some different things that these groups could do. Like what popped into my mind, if I was with the district office staff, I might ask one of them to play the role of a prospective candidate and do a mock interview. And just ask Linda to pretend that she was applying for the job and have the district staff interview. I mean, I would keep pushing it because I find that when you do things like that, people feel it's more authentic. They believe you. Sometimes it blows up in your face and backfires because you did something that no one's ever done before, and there was a reason no one ever did it before. Did that help? Yeah.
My question has to do, so Joel, I've been involved in 3 superintendent searches, right, from beginning to end. And, I think, community input is fantastic and it needs to be done, right? I think, to a certain extent, right, to find out what expectations may be or, what they're looking for. But I'm not looking at it from the front end, I'm looking at it from the back end. So, the site visits that you said was important, right? For the 3 searches that we did were very, they were not fruitful. They were not, I don't know whether it was honest or not, but, the way you do a site visit is, you tell the, final candidate, right, that you're going to do a site visit, and then they come and they provide to you, right, who we're going to interview. And as you said, right, we can't all 5 go because there's a Brown Act violation, at least the 3 searches that, I was involved in, but it was very unsatisfactory. Yep. So you say it's crucial, but, what can we do different? Because all 3 over the 9 years I was a school board member all had the same effect. So
here's what you can do. Here's what you can do different. You can tell them who you want to interview.
But we don't know who the players are.
Yes, you do.
How do we do that? Tell us.
Well, because the roles are the roles. You want to see a principal. You want to see a union president. You want to see you want to see a janitor. You want to see a community member who's had a kid that's been suspended. I think you have to,
privacy issues, right? We're talking about a community member whose child has been suspended. Joe, I'm just going to stop you there because, we ask for those things, but who we get stepped up.
So then I agree with you. Then don't do it. Yeah. What I'm saying is you will be criticized if you don't do it.
Right. No. And I agree.
Yeah.
We have to do it.
It's
but
not
I was
productive.
hoping a way, so that it would be more satisfactory, more productive, but it's just the way it is.
I agree with you. Although, we did it for principals all the time. And I guess part of it has to do with if I went like you were talking about, and here's the people that they asked, they provided me to talk to. And I did not get a balanced view of who this person is, I wouldn't hire him. So what I'm saying is, you're going to give me a group of people that aren't going to tell me the truth about you. Maybe I don't want to hire you. Versus I've gone where here's 10 people to go talk to. I really don't like this guy because he did this to me and I didn't like it. So how the process goes might be an indicator of whether you should hire them or not. That would be the way I would approach it, since you got to do it, because if you don't do it, you'll be criticized. But if it's bland and it doesn't go well, maybe that's feedback about whether this person really is the kind of person you want to hire. Are they vulnerable? Are they honest? Are they willing? If I was applying for San Marino superintendent and you went to Arcadia, I would want people to tell you what they really thought about me, and including the people that I ticked off, including the guy I fired. Let them talk to you about what I did. And you're going to learn more than that. So again, I would just say that I agree with you. 99% of the time it's not productive, but look at the process itself. And if you don't get anything out of it, that actually tells you something. The problem is you get so invested in the person by the time you get there, it is pro forma. It's hard to actually say, well, we're not sure about them now, because we're in the search firms push that. They do. You know, we don't want to go back. We don't want to start over again. We don't want to do whatever. But I think for you all, the stakes are so high because you're at this point where you really want to get this as right as it's possible to do. But I don't disagree with you at all about how frustrating those visits are. And especially if you have to go to Timbuktu to meet with, you know, whoever, and sometimes you do. Other questions, other comments?
Joel, you talked a little bit about time as a challenge for us. Time can also be an asset to us in terms of having, you know, we've got great staff here. We've got, you know, we don't have a superintendent, but we have great staff here. And as I'm looking at the timeline, how do we have more time to really think about this in terms of what's needed for the opening of school? I mean, the opening of school, like no other year before, because we've had 15 months of closures and pandemic, we need to really think about what we're doing, because yes, there's this need that we go through the process, but there's also a finite amount of resources and limitations to time as well as opportunity. I don't want to miss the opportunity of what I am doing in the summer. A lot of the work that a school district does is right now in planning. Correct me if I'm wrong, Cabinet, because I'm doing it in my school district. You are getting ready to meet the technological needs, right, Stephen? You are doing first aid packages. You're looking at how to gather the data as well as to get maximum input in terms of not only funding, but all of the programs that we have available, and then getting the messaging out on that website. Lena, I am sure you're crushing it, but you are absolutely working hard on the PD, the curriculum side, all of the facets that have to do with not only working with the principals on scheduling, but curriculum standards, you name it, you're doing it. I know that for a fact. And Dr. Delatorre, I know you are working overtime because you've already got 2 departments. And then of course, I challenged Linda by taking more. Okay, so I'm really asking the board to not only recognize the opportunity as well as the challenges, but to help me, because you know, we've got 3 people handling 5 roles, because Linda is doing business as well as HR as well as the superintendent. Now, you know, I am not Nam Jack. You know, I am being the leader. I'm going to advocate and say, you guys have to look at this as an opportunity, but we can't miss the opportunity by not recognizing that we may miss some opportunities here if we don't. Joel, I'm trying to get you to help us a little bit, because
let me help you a little
yeah,
bit.
this is an opportunity, but
Let me either help you or
hurt
you, make you mad, whatever. This is a lovely thing. I mean, I'm going to talk about a role that's a great role, because you can always walk away with it. Most places hire an interim. One of the reasons I asked you, I wanted you to do the forced choice, which probably was pushing too much, was if there was a way for you to decide in the next week or 10 days or 2 weeks what you were going to do, what option you were going to take, and there was more or less consensus about it, you can start moving forward. The more time that goes by, what typically happens is a district hires an interim. And the interim, this is what's a little ironic. It can be, you could appoint, you've kind of de facto done that. You've kind of appointed Linda is interim superintendent without actually doing it. If she's doing the work of the superintendent and she hasn't been appointed,
She is.
that's not
Oh,
right.
she-
That's not right. It's not right. It isn't. Sorry. And we can disagree about it. She can be a wonderful person. When Lauren took he did an interim for you. And I said to him, it's a 24/7 job. You think you're only working 2 days a week? You're not. So there's so much that has to be done. You need to think about that. So the best I can say to you is you really, if you need time, which is fair, to figure out what's the best way to find the superintendent, then you need to give some thought to hiring an interim. And there are people out there. If you don't want to appoint from within, you can also, I mean, as an option, you could appoint Linda and you could hire an interim CBO. You could do that. You could actually get someone in to do CBO stuff while Linda, or HR stuff. So it's not just, the option isn't just you have to have an interim superintendent come from the outside. And the other thing I want to say is search firms also help with that. So one of the things that one of the advantages of a search firm now is not only will they start the process of the recruiting and selection, they'll help you fill interim positions. And one thing to keep in mind, this is a bit of PR. You're not paying a superintendent's salary right now. So you're saving the money you would be paying for a superintendent right now. That money could go to an interim, or a piece of that money could go to an interim. Now, I don't know if the community would accept that, or how that plays. That goes back to some of the challenges, but that's a reality. You're not paying a superintendent salary at this moment. So the best I have to offer is you got two tracks. You need someone to be an interim superintendent today, given the school's got to open and what we talked about, the opportunities around the pandemic, and we don't want to lose it. And then the second is you need to keep working on deciding how you want to go about selecting a superintendent. And I think both of those things need to happen. And without them, the little bit I know about Linda, she's going to do everything you ask of her. And your staff, the staff here is amazing, and the ship is going to float. But I'm sorry, it's wrong. It is. It's not fair. And at the end of the day, maybe this isn't fair, but the little bit of that reputation that we talked about is connected to that. Because if you don't take that action, people know you don't have an interim. People know you don't have a superintendent. People know that you had Joel in. Some people are going to think you were idiots for doing that, but hopefully not as many as think, oh, well, maybe help them. And by the way, to be clear, I'm not available to be your interim. I wish I was, it'd be a ball, but I got grandkids, and my wife made it clear before I walked in here tonight, do not sign any papers, don't take any jobs, don't do anything. And I'd love to, and the reason why it's fun is because if I don't like you, I'll just tell you I'm leaving. But I think you need to think about that. I do. I think you need to think about having someone officially, in that role, whether it's appointed from within or you hire someone from outside. And if you decide that you want someone from the outside to be an interim, I may know a couple of people who you might want to talk to. One of which is not me. Does that help? Did I answer your question? Did I hurt you?
No, you helped
Okay.
to clarify, because I want my board to understand.
So if we hire intern, how long until we get a superintendent, or
So I think that's why we talked about 3 to 6 months.
3 to 6
It
months?
depending on, but that's why, look, the reason, if you think about this forced choice, and I'm not asking you to do it, I just want you to think about it. Let it, depending on what you decide to do of these 4 choices will determine what your timeline is, right? Does that make sense? I mean, as an example, if you decided to appoint a new superintendent from within, you don't need an interim, you don't need a search firm, you don't need a consultant. And you could do that as quickly as you wanted to do it. If you hire any of the other three options are going to take, I think, a minimum of 3 months. So then you need you would need an interim for 3 months until you fill the position. And given that July's kind of lost, I mean, if we go back to this list, how quickly could you draft just think about it for a minute. How quickly could you actually draft a brochure and get it published and ready to go? 2 weeks?
With input from the community?
So wait a minute, we're gonna get input from the community? So now we got a month. It might be a good month before you could and could you hold community meetings in July? Or would people be mad because you held these meetings and they were on vacation? These are all real practical things, I think, that frankly, an interim can help you, like tonight I was your interim superintendent tonight. This is what I did as an interim superintendent when I worked with the board. I'm not a search firm, I'm not a consultant, I'm not going to find your superintendent, but I would help you think about what your options are and be as respectful as I possibly could, because we want consensus. I mean, I don't know you that well, but I want you to have consensus. I want you to all be on the same page. Doesn't mean you will be. You can make a decision 3-2. I don't think you want to do that. I don't think you want to make a decision 4-1. I think if you can be 5-0, and so again, that was sort of why I was happy to work with Shelley and come and do this, because I think this is good work. I think what we did tonight is good work. But again, just for the sake of argument, all I was going to have you do, just to think about this, is each of you would rank 1 through 4, 1 being your top choice, 4 being your least choice, and you would circle it. You would go through all 4 of them, and then we would just see how many people took the first one and ranked it 1, 2, 3, or 4. And it's very possible that what you'd find out from doing this is there's no consensus at all. That would be good to know. Or you might find everybody ranked hire a search firm as number 1. And then, so it helps you, it just helps you when you're ready to get a picture of how close to consensus you are. So, it's just a tool that you can use. It's not brain surgery. You can figure it out on your own. So I think other questions, other comments? Yeah.
With an interim superintendent, what role would that interim play in the operations of the board, in potentially assisting with the search or not? What are their limitations?
There are no limitations. They would be your superintendent. They would not do the search, but they may help you find a search firm. They may help you go through the process or a consultant or whatever. They may help you think through that. They may help you interview, they may set up interviews with search firms, so they would do all the work that a superintendent does, which then allows staff to do the work that they need to do. But there's no limitations. The only limitation is the STRS limitation. So typically, we're getting into the weeds a little bit. So when I did my interims, I told you I like to be an artist. So I came up with a new model. I did it with a partner. So me and a partner were the interim superintendents, and that doubled the amount of time that a district could get. So Glendale had us for 6 months. And that worked really well. And you got 2 really cool people. So that's just another option, but it's more money, obviously. But the STRS is the limitation. Again, it's assuming that you're going to get someone for $1,000 a day, assuming it's still $48,000. That's 48 days. So we would work maybe 2 days a week, 2.5 days a week. So that's the implicit limitation. But in terms of the things that they would do and can do, including interacting with the community, the only thing that we negotiated is we weren't going to do football games, because it just would eat up too much time, and we were limited in our time. Other thoughts or questions? So if not, then what I always like to do is ask for a little bit of feedback. And I would just ask you to think for a minute how the evening went, how my work with you went. And on a scale of 1 being El Stinko and 5 being this was the great, I want you to show me on your hand 1 through 5 how I did with you tonight, and just make sure you give me the right finger. So just think about that. And if you could just hold your hand up and give me some feedback about how you thought tonight went.
I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Well, we haven't hired a superintendent, but for the superintendent term, I think each of us we got some public comment. They are talking about why the last superintendent did not really honor for the term.
Yeah,
So
term of his contract.
So can you help to interpret? I mean the term is that really can bound.
Yeah.
So I think that the public.
Yeah, it's tricky.
They are kind of blame the ball about the not.
Well, it's tricky. So you raise a really good point. So I don't know if Jeff had a 3-year contract. Is that?
Yeah, he did.
He had a 3-year contract. So if I understand you correctly, he wasn't bound by that contract. He could leave, but you were bound by that contract. So how do you explain that to anybody? Well, the contract is to protect him, not to protect you. That's the truth. And the law says, even though it's a 3-year contract, he has a right to 18 months. So if you decide you want to get rid of him, which wasn't the case, you have to buy out 18 months of a 3-year contract. Trying to get the public to understand any or all of that, I don't think you can. I really don't.
Yeah.
I really don't. It's a real dilemma.
Yeah, what I learned, probably have a lot of questions, but some is not make sense, you know.
Yeah.
But it's just keep repeating, and
Yeah.
I think the come out from one person and then spread out to a group, and then trying to use this to disqualify the ball,
right.
you know, the quality, you know.
Yeah. I don't know of any case where a board sued a superintendent to stay the term of their contract. I mean, think about it. If the person wants to leave, do you want them as your superintendent? So there's the other problem with it. But the only way that I can explain it to anyone in a public is these contracts are more to protect the superintendent. And there's a reason for that. I'm not talking about you all, but boards, I mean, you get hired by a board, you 5 people hire a superintendent. And then there's a special election, or what was a 3-2 in support of the superintendent turned into a 2-3. And it happens all the time. And they want to get rid of the superintendent because different parts of the public selected this person or wanted this person. Well, without that contract, you could let a person go tomorrow with not for cause. So that's why the law says that you got to buy them out for 18 months to protect against that. But like I said, there's no reciprocity that I know of that says, well, I signed a contract for 3 years, I got to stay at least 3 years. And I know of no case where a board made a person stay their term. And I can't imagine why anybody would do that. But the public has a right to be confused by that. So it's a really good point. It really is. Sorry, I don't have a better. Yeah, go ahead.
Is it okay if I switch topics? You mentioned, you noted yourself that we have an election next year for our seats. How would that factor into any of this process?
It does. I've been giving that some thought. So let me tell you, if I were you, I'm going to give you advice that you didn't ask for. It's what's great about this role, right? So given that timeline, if it was me, I would appoint from within.
You say you are me, mean that you are.
If I was the board, I would appoint from internal staff. I'll just say what it is. I'd appoint Linda. I'd appoint Linda as superintendent. I know that there's issues with that. I'm just telling you, you asked me. Then there's an election in a year and a half. I would give Linda a 2-year contract. I would give Linda a 2-year contract. And with the idea that there's going to be a board election, and Linda would know, and you would know, and the new board would know that an option after the new board is elected is to go out and find that 20-year superintendent. And I think that makes a lot of sense because you do not know what's going to happen in that board election. And frankly, to go out now and do all this work and do this search and spend this money and select someone and then have the board, have a board election and have 2 or 3 new seats or whatever. I have no idea what your dynamics are. Things are going to change. So that moment in time, because you've got two of you are filling in for, and you're going to have 4, if I understand correctly, you're going to have 4
seats open.
Yeah, so some of you may decide not to run. I mean, it's going to be you have an implicit instability because of that. Nothing you can do about it. You're a lot more stable because the 2 of you who agreed to do that, God bless you. You know, it really is a big deal, and the work that was done to get you all in place is a big deal. But so to me, looking analytically at what your situation is, that's what I would advocate for. It's not my role to do that, but you asked me.
You said implicit instability, looking at it from which lens?
From the lens of the community, knowing that the board very likely will change in a year and a half.
And what about the quality of a superintendent seeking a position?
I quite frankly think you'll be in a better position in a year and a half to do a 6-month recruitment for a superintendent that will be here for 20 years than you are right now at this moment. I believe that. I believe that to be true. You'll know more. And I think it's the job of the new board. I don't think it's your job. I think that board that gets elected in November of 2022, it's their job as a new board to go through this process. Like I said, that's the instability. It might be U5, great. If it's U5, then you've done your work in this time, and we did this work tonight. But in November of 2022, and I guess they're seated in January, right? December, great. Okay, so they're elected in November, sat in December. The first thing they do is go out and recruit for a new superintendent, or they renegotiate with Linda or whatever. But to me, that's just, I mean, again, I'm a very, the KISS model, keep it, all of this stuff we talked about, to me, it's just way too, I mean, trying to do community meetings and trying to simplify this and trying to talk to people and trying to recruit people and hiring a search firm and the money you'd have to spend. I mean, on the face of it, none of those options are very good, except, in my opinion, an internal appointment. And I'm overstepping my role. I'll tell you that right now. I'm a little uncomfortable, but that's never stopped me from saying.
No, I don't think so, because the 2 factors I already mentioned, this one of, because I think the candidate probably, unless they're from the out of state, they don't check. But your USC education department, I think there probably a lot of gossip there.
Right.
Already know what's going on in Southern California, each school district.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, as long as you open this can of worms, I know you were reluctant to open. Why would you recommend an interim within as opposed to without?
Well, you can't, an interim from within. I didn't say that.
Oh, okay.
No, I didn't. I
you
said
said
superintendent.
Sorry.
I said superintendent. Interim, I actually think it's better to get an interim from without. Because when you hire an interim from within, they do all their old jobs. It's never clean. And I think, well, you can tell me, we don't have to do the 5-finger thing, but you can give me the wrong finger. What was it like having a person come in who is not part of the district and work with you tonight? What was that like? Was it a good thing or a bad thing?
uncomfortable at times, but ultimately good.
So, that's my point, is I think you need that. You need someone who's going to push on you a little bit and not just accept this is the way we do it in San Marino. You need someone, like I told you at the very beginning, I have no skin in the game, so I can, if you guys, if we walk away and you don't like me and you never see me again, that's too bad, but that's okay. So hiring an interim from without is someone who, yeah, you can let them go tomorrow. That's another good thing. If you really don't like what they're doing, they're at will. And similarly, if they can't work with you, they can leave. They're under no obligation. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. So that's been my experience. And sometimes it's really challenging. The work that I did in Glendale, the board was going through a lot of really challenging things. However, one of the other advantages of hiring an interim is because you've got two of you are new to the board as of right now.
It's really complicated.
Yeah. Anyway, I mean, you probably haven't done norms and protocols, and you need all that before the school starts. You need to do that work. Who's going to do that work? Well, that's the work of a superintendent with you. That's not the work of staff to do with you or to do what you need someone to help you do that. And you need them. I mean, you really do. I mean, just the whole thing of who visits schools and how you visit schools and what happens when a school calls you and when someone from the community calls you and what's the role of the president versus the clerk and how do you handle complaints? I mean, you absolutely need that to protect yourself. And you need someone to help, get that done. And it's not terribly difficult work, but it's work that you should approve those, actually adopt them as a public action item and to protect yourself. And I think that's something an interim superintendent can do with you.
So you talked a little bit earlier about, you picked up on the fact that we have some momentum in our community right now, coming off of Measure E and coming off of this greater engagement and people wanting to really get back into schools. How does that play out with having an interim or knowing that things will shift in a year and a half? I mean, I don't want this
It
year to
doesn't.
be wasted.
That's my
as a
point.
Placeholder year.
That, Jane, that's exactly my point. That's why in my opinion, it makes more sense to appoint the superintendent, not the interim, appoint a superintendent from inside, because you're going to lose all that momentum. You're going to lose it. And you guys know the politics and the ins and outs of stuff, but that's my logic. That's exactly part of it. An interim's never going to be able to the community's never going to feel a connection with a person like me that says, I'm here for 3 months and, I'm a nice guy, but it's going to dissipate quickly. So it's one of the reasons why I think you're better off selecting a superintendent from within and doing it quickly, because school's going to start and you want to capture that.
Thank you. I know I put you in some uncomfortable
It's
questions.
okay. I told Shelley, nothing surprises me, and it's good. I mean, I think we get much more done if we can be open and honest and interact with these things. And this is, I mean, I don't want to minimize. This is tough. This is tough stuff. And here's the other thing. There's no perfect answer. Nothing you choose is going to be perfect. There's going to be downsides to whatever you do. There's a concept, managing downside variability. So that's really, the question is, what downside variability do you have the best chance of managing? In my opinion, it is selecting a superintendent from within in a 2-year contract with the idea that the new board would take on the role of deciding what the superintendent after that person or that person is. That would be, I mean, it just makes sense to me. It really does. But I don't live here. I'm not on the board. I don't even work here.
How about before you left from Acadia? What is Acadia climate? Is the same as San Marino, different?
No, for one thing, it's bigger. We had 10,000 kids. You've got 40.
Yeah, I know you don't have a money issue, but I mean the how
No,
about
I mean, the community was frankly much more diverse, but it was a high performing, high socioeconomic community. But and there were times where times where things would pop up, but we really didn't have some of the controversy. I mean, you had that cell tower deal, right? I mean, we just never really, I mean, we passed a huge bond. I did a $280 million renovation, and I had people mad at me because I renovated the high school. So what? Get over it. We have the issue, but it's funny. It really is different. And I think it's size. I really do think that the difference between 2,800 and 10,000, the 10,000 creates a buffer. Everybody. Everybody knows you. There's nowhere to hide in this district. There really isn't. So it's different. It really is different. I think it's one of the reasons Lauren was successful. The high school principal creates such they represent the district in a way, and in a district like this, same thing happened in Arcadia. David became superintendent. He was the high school principal. I came from the outside, but it's different. It really is different. It's odd because you're so close, but it really isn't the same. So rather than making you do 5 fingers, is there any feedback you have for me? Is there anything you would have had me do differently with you tonight? Anything you liked?
I think being honest, which I think you were, and being direct in telling us what our challenges are in finding viable candidates, both from your experience in your positions, but also from what you may know out in the community of where candidates may come from, is very important, because it lets us know the lay of the land. It lets us know, are we going to be bringing in a lot of good viable candidates, and if so, what are the traits of those candidates? I think that's very important, because it gives us an understanding of what our options are.
Thank you. Other thoughts? Any other feedback? Not going to hurt my feelings.
I like the way in which you took a very collaborative tone with us. It wasn't like you were teaching us as much as I think you wanted to bring us together in a conversation that was frank. I like the engagement we had back and forth, and I appreciated also your forthrightness. I love the way you tenored the whole, when there are challenges, there are opportunities for us to really appreciate and to take charge and to maximize the opportunities. And that's what we try to do always for our students. And I really liked when you asked us to really come up with characteristics. And I would venture to say that of the 3 teams that work together, and I was checking off all the things that my fellow board members were saying, and they were all the things that you and I talked about. So we all come from different places, but we want what's best for San Marino. And I think I heard that tonight in terms of your genuineness and wanting to help. And so thank you, Joel. Thank you for taking my call at all the different times of the day, and for leading this discussion that was very important and necessary.
Thank you. It was truly my pleasure. People don't appreciate how much you give to do this role. So thank you. And, just from, I can't talk for the community, but it's a big deal. And I just make this comment that the fact that there was such strong commonalities in those characteristics is not small stuff, because you could all been different, right? So you have a common place to start from. And my guess is the community isn't that different. If you can get a way to codify that and share it, people will say, oh, well, we all really do want the same thing. So thank you.
Thank
And
you.
best of luck. And if there's something I can do for you in the future other than be your interim or superintendent, I'd be happy to do that. I thank you for all the support from staff. You made it really easy. And Shelley, thank you for the time we spent. You know, it would have been really hard to just come in cold. So I really appreciate it. So thank you and best of luck.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sean.
And with that, I will adjourn our meeting.
I do have one question.
Okay.
I just noticed that we don't have any board policies in place regarding
We
superintendents.
do have board policy in place because we've hired a number of superintendents. They may be what you don't have them for review or you haven't been able to access them.
I do not see them listed in Gamut, so I think it's just maybe an oversight. They have not been.
So perhaps that's something I can adjourn and we can discuss. It's because it's not agendized.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone.